The evening air in Richard Gray's penthouse shimmered with golden light. He was the kind of CEO whose name was a headline, whose words moved markets. Tonight was a private affair, a gathering of his top executives and partners. Wine flowed, music swelled, and laughter bounced off the marble halls. Amidst the sharp suits and elegant dresses moved Amara, a quiet maid hired just a week ago. Her job was to serve, to be invisible. Head slightly bowed, she polished glasses and refilled trays, her presence a silent hum in the background. Yet, she saw everything: the forced laughter, the sycophantic nods, the smiles that vanished the moment Richard looked away. Richard, the center of this universe, exuded a charm laced with arrogance. He thrived on admiration, respect, and a little bit of fear. After a few drinks, his competitive nature surfaced. His eyes fell upon an antique chessboard on the coffee table. "Still undefeated, right, Richard?" An executive chuckled. Richard leaned back, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Of course," he declared. "Chess isn't just a game. It's about strategy, intelligence, power. Most people can't even grasp it." The comment hung in the air, a testament to his ego. Amara, refilling wine glasses nearby, heard every word. Her eyes lingered on the board for a brief moment. Richard caught her glance and smirked. "You like chess, miss?" She hesitated. "Amara, sir." "Well, Amara," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do you know how to play? Or is that a bit too complicated?" A few guests snickered, anticipating her embarrassment, but Amara simply met his gaze, her eyes calm and steady. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "I know how to play." The room erupted in laughter. "Be careful, Richard," one man joked. "She might beat you." The CEO grinned, loving the attention. "I'll take that risk," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Come, let's see what you've got." For a heartbeat, Amara paused. Then, she carefully set down her tray, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked to the chessboard. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. No one had expected this. To them, she was just the maid. But there she was, sitting across from one of the most powerful men in the city. Richard poured another drink, playing to his audience. "Now, don't take it personally when I win. I've been playing this game since before you could spell chess." Amara offered a polite smile. "Then I'm sure it will be a good match, sir." Her tone was respectful, yet carried a quiet confidence that pricked at his ego. The crowd drew closer, phones out, ready to capture the comical moment of a CEO humbling a maid. Richard made his first move, aggressive and showy. He was performing. "You know," he said, moving his knight, "chess is a lot like life. The strong pieces dominate and the weaker ones get sacrificed." Amara looked at the board, her expression unreadable. She made her first move, slow, deliberate, precise. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it's the quiet pieces that change the game." Her response silenced a few of the chuckles. Richard brushed it off. "We'll see about that." The game unfolded, but not how anyone expected. Amara's moves were purposeful, her focus absolute. Richard, on the other hand, started to frown. He was waiting for beginners' mistakes that never came. In fact, her strategy was so sharp, he had to stop and think, really think. The whispers in the room changed. "She's actually good," someone murmured. Richard tried to ignore the rising tension. "You've played before," he stated, his voice now laced with uncertainty. "A few times," Amara replied, her fingers gliding over the pieces. The board was transforming. Richard's pawns were disappearing. A bishop was trapped. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. This was no longer a joke. The laughter had died completely, replaced by a fascinated, breathless silence. The invisible maid was methodically dismantling the unbeatable CEO. Minutes stretched on, marked only by the soft click of chess pieces. Richard's smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief. Amara remained serene, her calm gaze seeing moves ahead that he had completely missed. Everyone could see it now. She wasn't just playing, she was winning. As Richard finally realized he'd walked into a trap of his own making, Amara made one last elegant move. She looked up, met his stunned eyes, and with a soft, graceful voice said, "Your move, sir." He didn't know it yet, but the game that began as a joke was about to become a lesson in humility he would never, ever forget. The laughter still echoed through the grand living room as Amara sat across from Richard, the CEO who thought this little game was going to be a joke. Everyone had gathered closer, executives in suits, women with champagne glasses, and a few waiters pretending to wipe tables just to watch. The sound of soft jazz played in the background, but all eyes were fixed on the maid sitting calmly in front of the man who ruled the company like a king. Richard leaned back in his chair, that arrogant half-smile never leaving his face. He felt untouchable, in his wealth, his intelligence, and his ego. The maid across from him, quiet, composed, hands folded neatly, was just a form of amusement, a way to make his guests laugh. "Well," he said, placing his fingers on the board, "let's make this quick. I've got real competition waiting after dinner." The crowd chuckled. Amara didn't respond. She simply studied the board as if she had already played this game in her mind before it even started. Her face was calm, unreadable. Richard moved his first piece swiftly, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You see?" he said smugly. "In chess, you always have to think ahead. That's what separates people like me from people who just follow instructions." There was another round of soft laughter, but it felt weaker this time. Something about Amara's silence made the air feel heavier. When it was her turn, she moved her pawns slowly, her fingers delicate but confident. "I agree," she said quietly. "But sometimes the ones who follow instructions learn from the ones who don't." A few people blinked, unsure if she was joking or serious. Richard forced a laugh. "Interesting strategy," he said, "but it won't help you when you're losing." For the next several moves, Richard played aggressively, advancing his pieces quickly, trying to show dominance. Amara responded with precision, never rushing, never hesitating. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, and strangely powerful. After 10 minutes, one of the guests whispered, "Wait, isn't he losing pieces?" The others leaned closer. It was true. 3 of Richard's pawns and a knight were gone. Meanwhile, Amara's side looked nearly untouched. Richard frowned, his arrogance cracking just slightly. "You're good," he muttered, moving another piece. Amara smiled faintly. "I just think before I move, sir." The way she said it, soft but confident, made a few people exchange glances. Richard shifted in his seat. He could feel the attention of the room pressing on him. For years, he had been the smartest man in every room he walked into. Every meeting, every deal. He always had control. But now, sitting across from a woman who cleaned floors for a living, that control was slipping through his fingers like sand. He tried to recover his pride with humor. "I see what's going on here," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You're hustling me, aren't you?" Amara looked up from the board and met his gaze. "No, sir," she said. "I'm just playing the game you invited me to." That line hit harder than it should have. Even the laughter in the room stopped for a moment. As the game continued, the sound of the chess pieces clicking against the board grew louder than the music or the whispers. Richard leaned forward now, focused, his smile gone completely. He was no longer playing to entertain. He was trying to win. But Amara was unshaken. She played like a storm disguised as a calm sea. Her strategy was subtle, but ruthless. After another 10 minutes, he muttered under his breath, "This isn't possible." Amara moved her bishop smoothly, trapping one of his most important pieces. "Possible," she said softly, "is just a matter of perspective." A low murmur rippled through the guests. They could feel it, the shift. The balance of power in the room had changed. One of Richard's partners whispered, "She's destroying him." Richard heard it. His jaw tightened. He was sweating now. He reached for his glass of whiskey and took a long sip. "You're not bad, Amara. You ever play professionally?" Amara shook her head. No, sir. My father taught me. He said chess teaches patience and humility. That word, humility, seemed to sting. Richard tried to laugh, but it sounded hollow. Well, I hope he taught you how to lose gracefully. Amara's next move was fast. Her queen slid across the board like lightning, landing precisely where it needed to be. The crowd gasped. Richard froze, his eyes flicking from his king to her queen, realizing too late what she had done. Check, Amara said quietly. The room fell dead silent. The arrogant smile that had lived on Richard's face all night was gone. His guests watched him, their expressions shifting from amusement to awe. He looked up at her, his voice low. How did you... Amara's eyes softened. I just thought ahead, sir. That was the moment the laughter died completely. The maid who had been brought into the game as a joke had just turned it into a lesson no one in that room would ever forget. Richard sat back in his chair, staring at the board. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. The silence around him was louder than applause. And across from him, Amara simply folded her hands in her lap, calm as ever, as if winning was never the point. The room was silent. So silent, you could hear every beat of your own heart. Just minutes ago, it was filled with laughter, with mockery, with the smug confidence of men who thought they owned the world. Now, nothing. The only sound was the faint tick of the clock and the slow, steady breathing of Amara. She sat perfectly still, her dark eyes laser-focused on the chessboard. Across from her, Richard Gray, a CEO used to commanding boardrooms and bending people to his will, looked lost. His fingers hovered over a chess piece, hesitating. How could this be happening? He was so sure. She was a maid, polite, quiet, practically invisible. She wasn't supposed to be sitting here, in front of everyone, dismantling him move by move. He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You got lucky, he muttered, trying to claw back some control. Beginner's luck, right? Amara looked up at him, her grace unshaken. Luck doesn't plan 5 moves ahead, sir, she said softly. Her tone wasn't arrogant, it wasn't mocking, it was just a fact, and that's what made it sting so much. The guests shifted uncomfortably. For years, Richard had been the man who never lost. His entire career was built on dominance. And now, he was trapped in check by someone he hadn't even considered a real opponent. He leaned forward again, scanning the board. You play well, he admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Who taught you? Amara moved another piece with quiet purpose. My father, she said. He believed every move in life should mean something, even the ones that look small. Her words hung in the air. A few guests smiled faintly, sensing this was no longer just a chess game. It had become something more. Richard tried to laugh it off. Well, your father must have had a lot of time on his hands. Amara met his gaze, her expression soft but piercing. No, sir. He just made time for what mattered. That single sentence silenced him. The conversation had veered into a territory he couldn't control. He moved his rook, a desperate attempt to corner her queen, but she countered instantly. He moved again, but her next move sliced through his defenses like a quiet storm. Within moments, she'd set a trap so subtle no one else saw it coming. Check again, sir, she said, her voice still calm. Richard blinked, his jaw tightening. You planned this? Amara tilted her head. I try to plan everything, sir. It saves me from mistakes. The crowd murmured, a wave of awe rippling through them. The maid they'd overlooked had just turned the whole room upside down. Richard's face flushed red. He slammed a piece down. This is ridiculous. But Amara didn't even flinch. Chess doesn't care who plays, sir, only who thinks. That line hit harder than anything else. Elegant, simple, and devastatingly true. A soft, knowing silence filled the room. Someone in the back whispered, She's incredible. Richard heard it all. He stared at the board, but there was no escape. Every piece of his power was now a liability. She had seen through his strategy, and more than that, she'd seen through his pride. With a shaky breath, he made one last move. Amara looked at the board for just a second before gently sliding her queen into place. "Checkmate," she said softly. The word hit the room like thunder. Gasps. Someone dropped a glass. A few people started to clap before catching themselves. Richard froze, his hands trembling. For a long, painful moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he leaned back, his proud expression replaced by something entirely new: humility. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not as an employee, but as the woman who had just outsmarted him in every way imaginable. Who are you, really?" he whispered. Amara offered a faint smile. "Just someone who was underestimated one too many times." The crowd murmured again, but this time it was with respect, with admiration. Richard rubbed his temples and, without another word, extended his hand across the board. "Well played," he said quietly. Amara shook it. That night, Richard stayed behind, staring at the chessboard long after everyone had left. The game was over, but the lesson was just beginning. And as Amara quietly returned to her duties, everyone who was there knew they had witnessed the exact moment when power, pride, and prejudice were all checkmated by quiet brilliance. The city lights glittered outside Richard Gray's penthouse, but inside, the air was thick with disbelief. The elegant guests, once laughing and toasting, were now frozen statues around a chessboard. Richard, the untouchable CEO, sat motionless, staring at the checkmate that had just shattered his pride. His hand, the same one that signed multi-million-dollar deals, hovered over his fallen king, but he couldn't move. He had lost. Not to a business rival, but to his maid, Amara, a woman he'd challenged to a game as a cruel joke. Amara sat calmly across from him, her hands resting gently in her lap. She didn't smile or gloat. She simply let the silence speak for itself. The guests started whispering, their words cutting through the tension. "She actually beat him. Did you see how she trapped his queen? Unbelievable. He didn't even see it coming." Finally, Richard let out a long breath. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. For years, he'd prided himself on being the smartest man in any room, the ultimate strategist, the man who could never be outplayed. Now, facing this woman in a simple maid's uniform, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: humility. He forced a faint laugh, trying to mask the embarrassment gnawing at his ego. "You're full of surprises," he said, his voice a mix of jest and genuine shock. Amara tilted her head slightly. "It wasn't meant to surprise anyone, sir," she replied softly. "You invited me to play. I just did." Her polite, powerful calm silenced the room once again. She hadn't asked for this attention. She had simply accepted a challenge and won. Richard glanced at the board. "How long have you been playing?" he asked, his tone lower now. "Since I was a child," she answered. "My father taught me when I was 7. We used to play every night." He raised an eyebrow. "Your father must have been a smart man." "He was," Amara said. "He believed chess was more than a game. He said every piece teaches a lesson, even the pawns." Richard frowned. "And what lesson is that?" Amara looked up, her gaze steady and clear. "That even the smallest piece can change the whole game, if it's moved the right way." The words hung in the air like poetry. Everyone knew she wasn't just talking about chess. For the first time, Richard didn't know what to say. He just nodded slowly. "That's wise," he murmured. Amara stood, smoothing her uniform. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I should return to my work." But before she could leave, Richard said quickly, "Wait." She turned. "Yes, sir?" He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, all arrogance gone, replaced by curiosity and respect. "You're not just a maid, are you?" A small, enigmatic smile touched Amara's lips. "I'm a worker, sir, just like anyone else." She gave a polite nod and walked away, the crowd parting for her in silent awe. After the guests left, Richard remained alone, staring at the chessboard, replaying her brilliant final moves in his mind. He poured himself a drink. Even the smallest piece, he whispered to himself. That night he couldn't sleep. Her calm confidence, her quiet dignity, had exposed a glaring flaw in his own character, the danger of underestimating others. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the penthouse, illuminating the untouched chessboard. Richard picked up a pawn, turning it over in his fingers. For years he had treated people like this piece, small, replaceable, unimportant. But now, he saw it differently. The pawn was the foundation. Without it, the game was meaningless. He set it down carefully. For the first time in his life, Richard Gray, the man who always had to win, realized that losing to the right person can teach you more than any victory ever could. Checkmate wasn't just the end of the game. It was the beginning of his awakening. The next morning, sunlight streamed into Richard Gray's penthouse, but it did little to brighten his mood. He sat alone at the dining table, staring at the chessboard, the pieces still frozen in their final positions from the night before. Amara's soft-spoken checkmate echoed in his mind, a gentle melody he couldn't shake. For the first time in years, looking at the board didn't make him feel powerful. It made him feel small, humbled. It was a strange sensation. He wasn't angry, not really. He'd lost games before, but never like this. Losing to Amara hadn't bruised his pride. It had challenged something deeper within him. It forced him to confront his own arrogance, his blind confidence, and the way he treated people like pawns on his personal board. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes fixed on the queen that had trapped his king. How did she do it? How did she see every move before he even thought of it? Later that day, Richard made a decision that baffled his assistant. He canceled all his morning meetings, even the crucial investor calls. Instead of heading to his high-rise office, he found himself driving toward the modest neighborhood where Amara's cleaning agency was located. "Sir, are you sure about this?" his assistant had asked, confused. "I'm sure," Richard replied quietly. "Some things can wait." The agency office was a world away from the marble and gold he was used to. It was small, plain, and functional. The receptionist's eyes widened in shock when he walked in. "Mr. Gray, we weren't expecting—" He cut her off gently. "I'm looking for one of your employees. Her name is Amara." The woman blinked. "Amara Williams? She's working today, a hotel downtown." Richard nodded. "Thank you." He handed her his business card. "Please tell her I'd like to speak with her when she's finished." When Amara returned to the agency that afternoon, tired from her shift, she was told a certain CEO had stopped by. Her first reaction wasn't excitement, but confusion. Why would a man like him seek her out? People from his world didn't usually give a second thought to people from hers, but she was wrong. The next evening, as she arrived at his building for work, she found Richard waiting near the lobby entrance. He was dressed simply this time, his usual air of power noticeably absent. When he saw her, he straightened up, almost awkwardly. "Amara," he greeted, his voice much quieter than before. "Sir," she replied politely. "I didn't expect to see you again." He gave a small, self-deprecating chuckle. "Yeah, neither did I." An unfamiliar silence hung between them. The man who always had the perfect words seemed to be searching for them. Finally, he sighed. "Listen, about last night, I owe you an apology." She frowned slightly. "For what?" "For turning you into a joke," he said, his voice laced with regret. "For underestimating you." Amara's expression softened, but her tone remained steady. "You didn't underestimate me, sir. You just didn't see me." That one sentence hit him harder than any insult could. He swallowed, nodding slowly. "You're right, I didn't, and I should have." After another brief pause, he surprised her. "I want to offer you something." Her eyes narrowed with a hint of a playful smile. "Another chess game?" He laughed, a genuine warm laugh this time. No, a job. She blinked, processing his words. A job? Yes, not as a cleaner, he clarified quickly. In my company, we have a mentorship program for employees who show potential. I'd like to include you. Amara hesitated, her instincts making her cautious. Why me, sir? Richard looked at her with a newfound humility. Because you have what most of my executives lack: patience, focus, and humility. You think before you act. You can't buy or teach that. Amara studied him, searching for any sign of a hidden agenda, but found only sincerity. Still, she answered carefully, I appreciate the offer, sir, but I like my work. It's honest. He smiled faintly. That's exactly why you'd be perfect. The offer hung in the air. For a moment it seemed she might refuse, but then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. I'll think about it. Richard extended his hand. That's all I ask. She shook it, her grip firm and steady. That night, Richard stood in the quiet lobby long after she'd gone. He wasn't thinking about profits or market shares. He was thinking about character, about how one quiet woman had completely shifted his perspective. Glancing at his reflection in the glass doors, he didn't see the powerful CEO. He just saw a man who had a lot to learn. And he smiled. He later placed that same chessboard in his office, not as a symbol of dominance but as a reminder. A reminder that brilliance can come in humble shoes and that true intelligence isn't about how loud you speak, but how deeply you understand. Weeks had passed since that unforgettable night, yet the memory of it lived quietly in both of their minds. The CEO who had been humbled, and the maid who had become a mirror of truth. But while life moved on, something between them had shifted permanently. For Amara, nothing had really changed on the outside. She still wore her same neatly pressed uniform, still woke up before dawn, and still took the same bus route into the city. But inside, she carried a strange new awareness, that she had unknowingly left a mark on a man who once thought he had everything figured out. For Richard, everything felt different. His world, once ruled by numbers and deals, now seemed quieter, more reflective. He found himself pausing before speaking, listening more in meetings and noticing the smallest things. The way employees hesitated before sharing ideas. The way some junior staff never looked him in the eyes. He had never realized how much fear surrounded his presence until that game with Amara stripped away the illusion. One morning, during a company-wide meeting, Richard surprised everyone. Instead of discussing profits, he spoke about humility. The smartest person in the room, he said, isn't always the one speaking the loudest. Sometimes it's the one listening quietly in the back. The staff exchanged puzzled looks. This wasn't the Richard Gray they knew. This was softer, more human. Later that day, he called his executive team together. I want to start a new initiative, he announced. A mentorship program for anyone with potential but without opportunity. I don't care about degrees or titles. I care about people who think differently. His team stared at him, shocked. Sir, one of them said, that's unlike you. Richard smiled faintly. Good. It's time to be unlike me. And so the Gray Mentorship Program was born. Within a week, applications flooded in, from janitors, secretaries, and cafeteria staff. But one name caught Richard's eye immediately: Amara Williams. When he saw her name on the list, a small smile touched his face. Of course, he murmured. A few days later, she received a letter in a simple white envelope, her name handwritten in black ink. It read, Congratulations. You have been selected to participate in the Gray Mentorship Program. Your perspective, discipline, and problem-solving ability have set you apart. Amara read it twice, then a third time. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When she arrived at the office for orientation, she wore a simple cream dress, not her uniform. As she walked through the gleaming marble halls, whispers followed her, but she kept walking, her steps measured and steady. Inside the conference room, Richard stood by the window. When she entered, he turned, his expression warm and sincere. You came, he said. I wasn't sure if I should, she admitted. I was, he replied. This was meant for you. He gestured toward a seat. Do you know why I started this program? He asked. Amara shook her head. Because of you, he confessed. That night, you showed me something I'd forgotten. That intelligence has no uniform, and potential has no title. Her eyes softened. You didn't need to start a program for that, sir. He smiled. Maybe not. But sometimes, lessons only stick when they become actions. As the days passed, Amara spoke with other mentors and employees, her calm confidence drawing people in. Her words carried weight because they were sincere. Soon, even the executives who had once laughed at her began to show respect. They noticed how Richard now turned to her during discussions, how he asked for her opinion, and how she spoke with clarity and wisdom. One afternoon, an executive joked, "Careful, Amara, don't outsmart the boss again." The room erupted in warm laughter. Even Richard laughed. "Oh, she already did," he said. "I'm just trying to catch up." That moment marked a quiet shift in the company's culture. The atmosphere lightened and barriers began to fall. Amara's influence, though subtle, rippled through every department. One evening, after everyone had left, Richard walked past the office chess set. He stopped, smiled, and rearranged the pieces just the way Amara had during their first game. Then he wrote a short note and placed it beside the board. Great moves inspire greater change. The next morning, Amara found it and smiled. When their eyes met across the meeting room, she knew he remembered, and he always would. Because sometimes it doesn't take a grand speech to change a person. Sometimes it just takes one quiet game and a single brilliant move. Months passed, and what began as a quiet lesson had turned into a legacy. The story of the maid who beat the CEO at chess had spread quietly through the company, not as gossip, but as inspiration. People whispered it in break rooms, retold it to new interns, and smiled when they passed the glass chess set now permanently displayed in the company lobby. On the small plaque beneath it, engraved in elegant silver letters, were the words, "Never underestimate the quiet ones. They might be thinking 3 moves ahead." Amara had changed more than just one man that night. She had changed an entire company. Through the newly established Gray Mentorship Program, employees who were once overlooked were now being recognized for their hidden talents. The janitor who loved numbers? He became a data analyst. The security guard who sketched in his notebook was now designing marketing posters. The cleaning lady who had once been invisible was now one of the company's rising stars. And at the center of it all was Amara, not as an executive or a leader by title, but as a quiet symbol of what integrity, patience, and wisdom could achieve. One crisp morning, she stood at the front of a small conference hall addressing a group of new mentees. Her voice, calm and steady, carried more power than any speech filled with corporate jargon ever could. "When I first came here," she said, "I was just a worker cleaning floors. I didn't think anyone even noticed me. But that night, that game, it taught me something. Sometimes you don't have to raise your voice to make people hear you. You just have to make your move and let the result speak for itself." The audience sat in silence, every word sinking deep. When she finished, they clapped, not out of politeness, but out of genuine respect. From the back of the room, Richard watched with quiet pride. He had changed too. The sharp, commanding tone he once used had softened into one of patience and empathy. For the first time in his career, he felt like a true leader, not because of his position, but because of what he had learned from a woman who once stood in the shadows. After the session, he approached her. "You've become quite the teacher," he said with a warm smile. Amara turned, her own smile faint but genuine. "And you've become a good listener," she replied. He chuckled. "I had a very good teacher." They both laughed softly, a shared moment between two people transformed by a single game. Then Richard's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking," he said. "We're expanding the mentorship program internationally next quarter. I'd like you to lead it, officially." Amara blinked in surprise. "Me?" He nodded. "Who better? You understand what this program is about more than anyone. You are the reason it exists." For a moment she was silent. Her life had always been simple, predictable, and small in the eyes of the world. This was a future she never imagined, a chance to help others feel seen. Finally, she nodded. If I can help people believe in themselves the way you learned to, then yes, I'll do it. Richard extended his hand, and she took it. That handshake wasn't just an agreement. It was the closing of one story and the beginning of another. Over the next few months, Amara worked tirelessly to expand the program. She visited schools, training centers, and communities where talent was often buried under poverty or prejudice. She told her story, not to glorify herself, but to remind people that value doesn't wear a suit or speak with a perfect accent. One afternoon, she passed a small park and noticed a group of kids playing chess. A little boy about 10 struggled to move his pieces while his older opponent smirked. Amara smiled and walked over. "Mind if I help?" she asked gently. The boy looked up, hopeful. "I keep losing," he sighed. She knelt beside him. "Losing isn't the end," she said softly. "It just means you're learning. Think before you move, not after. Every piece has a purpose, even the small ones." The boy nodded, his eyes lighting up. Within minutes, his next few moves surprised his opponent, and for the first time that day, he won. He looked up at her, beaming. "Thanks, lady," Amara laughed. "You're welcome. Just remember, never underestimate yourself." As she walked away, a warm breeze brushed against her face. The world felt bigger now, not because of fame, but because she had found meaning. Years later, a journalist asked Richard what the most defining moment of his career was. He didn't mention his first big merger or his rise to CEO. He simply smiled and said, "The night I lost a game of chess." The reporter laughed. "That must have been some game." Richard nodded slowly. "It was. It taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Never judge anyone by where they start. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one playing the smartest game." And somewhere far away, Amara continued to do what she'd always done best, make her moves quietly, humbly, and with purpose.